Hello and welcome to the Raptor Show, powered by DoorDash on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. I'm your host, William Liu. As a reminder, we are now streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel, Monday to Friday between 2 and 3 p.m. To people watching, hello. And if you are not able to catch it live, you can always go to Sportsnet's YouTube channel after the fact and find it there. In fact, I'm pretty sure that is actually, if you're looking for the podcast immediately after it comes out, I think YouTube is probably the fastest way to get it, even before the podcast, feeds or whatever. So later in the show, I will be taking your Twitter questions. So you can continue to send them to me at William_Lou on Twitter, and we will get to them in the second segment. But first, join on this Friday afternoon by Raptors.com's Vivek Jacob. Vivek, what's going on, man?
Not as much, man. It's the weekend. Good times.
Is it good times, V? Whatever. Do words not have meaning anymore? Look. Before we get to practice, and I know you were in attendance, at least virtually, and your piece on Justin Champagnie, and also kind of wanted to talk about the most improved Raptors player this season. But I have to ask you this because in yesterday's show with Amy and Savannah, we talked it to death, really. But I have to ask you one last time this one question that we hashed out on yesterday's show.
Open shot, fate of the universe on the line, or the Martians have the death beam pointed at Earth. You better hit it. I want.
Who do you want, Vivek?
I want Ray Allen taking the shot.
Oh, okay. That's a good choice.
I've seen too much, and honestly, I actually did my own little stat thing where I was looking at the last couple minutes of games in playoffs, and he came out on top as the number one shooter. He had like a true shooting percentage of like 70% in the final 2 minutes of playoff games. And I was like, that's nuts. So I'll ride with Ray Allen.
That's a really great pick. Because honestly, like when we think about last shot, we always think about like somebody creating that last shot. But in terms of like kicking out to somebody, I don't think there's anybody I'd rather kick it out to than Ray Allen. Like lightning quick release. The footwork's going to be there. So if you need a three, his feet are going to be behind the line. Obviously with the famous shot, for the Heat that saved them in 2013, or 2013? Yeah, 2013. Game 6. And yeah, just, of course, man. Like, literally the greatest shooter of all time before Steph did his thing. That was a great moment, man.
He got game. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that's enough last shot talk. Honestly, it's become my least favorite subject very quickly. Obviously, the Raptors have not played since Tuesday, so there's a lot of discussion. So there is actual new developments coming out of practice today. So we saw OG Anunoby speak to the media. Vivek, you were there. Can you relay what is going on with OG? Obviously, he's not played since November 18th, but usually when a player has been out and then speaks to the press, that is usually a good sign that their return is around the corner, yeah?
It is usually a good sign. And we asked OG Anunoby what his status was for tomorrow against the Warriors, and he said, we will see. I think he's feeling good and having gone through the practices. I think it's more about how the body responds at this point. What I found interesting was he did say with this type of injury, with the hip pointer, it's all about rest and just letting it heal. But then he also said that he's been getting his conditioning in, so that won't be an issue. So I don't know how you managed to do both of that, but if he has, good for him. And obviously the sooner he's back, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, the timing of this, I would never complain about the timing of this, but it is a little bit funny that, like, as soon as the NBA has gone into this thing right now where they're just having, like, 10 players per day, basically, put into, COVID protocols. And maybe there's talk of, like, maybe we pause or at least delay something. Christmas games are coming up. Obviously, that's, like, the NBA's marquee day. Are you going to have players available for that? Like, Steph Curry's in the protocol now. Like, is he going to be available to play, like, Christmas, for example? He's obviously going to be a big part of that. As soon as that happens, the Raptors are about to have a full complement of players, which, the timing is you can't control it. But for OG's sake, so he's been out since November 18th. The Raptors were 6-7 without him during this stretch. By the way, if you look at just the prognosis of a hip pointer, because I feel like because this was asked like every single day at practice, like, hey, what's OG status? What's OG status? Like when you hear like the same news but repeat it back to you like 10 times, you start to feel worse about it rather than if Nick just told you, hey, OG's got a hip injury, he's going to be out for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
which is usually how long a hip pointer takes. And, this is going to be 4 weeks if he does return on the weekend. But, nothing really out of the ordinary for a hip pointer. I don't think people would be feeling as much angst about it, I guess, as compared to the fact that, they had a lot of these updates. But at the same time, it's going to be good. I think really, since if OG is back tomorrow, which will be wonderful news, we go back to the question that we've asked ever since the start of the season, which is, who is your starting lineup? Because the Raptors have had this sort of thing where they've played small with OG, Pascal, and Scotty in the middle. They have played bigger with a center in the middle. We've seen Chris do it. We've seen Kem do it. We've seen Precious do it the most. But if everyone's available tomorrow, which it does seem like, Kem is questionable as well. He's upgraded to questionable. He's been out with knee soreness. Precious was only out for precaution because he potentially might have come in contact with somebody. I'm not really sure, but he wasn't actually sick himself, so he's going to be back and available. What is your starting five now?
Yeah, so just to clarify with Kem Birch, Nick Nurse did say that they're questionable, but when Kem Birch spoke, he did say that he does not expect to play against the Warriors. He said that Monday against Orlando is probably more likely. So just a bit of clarity on that. In terms of the starting five, I can see with Birch not available, them just going, with the best five and just sneaking OG in there if he's available. But long term, I would say I lean towards having Kem Birch in there and moving Gary Trent Jr. to the bench. And so it would be Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and Kem Birch. And the reason for that is because I honestly believe that whether it's OG Anunoby or Scotty Barnes or Pascal Siakam, I think their best strengths are accentuated when they're going up against smaller players or players similar to their size. And so when you slide them up, I think it takes them away from their best advantages a little bit. And obviously we know the rebounding has been a big issue, so I just prefer to have someone like Kem Birch in there. And then, you hope that the scoring punch that Gary Trent Jr. has been bringing to the starting lineup, that can continue off the bench.
Yeah, I'm not fully in support of this just because I've been really enamored with Gary, and I think a lot of fans have been as well this season, for good reasons, honestly. He's had a lot of great performances. I think one big advantage you have if you do potentially go this route is that you can really limit how much Svi plays at the shooting guard position. And this season he has been underperforming. I wouldn't even say underperforming. It's not like he had this huge reputation coming in, but in terms of what the Raptors need from the backup shooting guard position, that has been a sore spot on the team for, I don't know, man, maybe since the first 3 weeks of the season. It's just so painful to see him play 25 minutes and not really contribute defensively, not really create for others. And then when he's asked to do the catch and shooting for three, which he is good at, he just hasn't delivered on that front. So if you do, as you suggest, move Gary to the bench, still play him around 30 minutes off the bench, which is still doable, but nothing like the 40 minutes. You have OG essentially serving as the two guard in the starting five, and then you have Gary essentially bumping Svi out of the rotation because you won't need a backup shooting guard if you have Gary coming off the bench. I mean, that's an interesting approach. I mean, do you think that'd be easy sell to Gary though?
It might not be an easy sell to Gary, but I mean, I think it's the best sell for the team, in my opinion. I can definitely see it going the other way, where you just put the best five out there and you try to make it work. But I just honestly believe the rebounding to this point has been too much of an issue to not have that as, the fundamental focus. I think, in terms of the shooting percentages between OG and Gary at the two guard position, that's not something I'm concerned about. And obviously we've seen OG's shot creation come a long way as well.
Right.
So I think when you have Gary off the bench, to your point, it just allows you to play the weaker players less, and you still are able to slot in Utah for his steady dose of minutes, which I think he's going to be a really important player over the remainder of the season. And I just think all the pieces sort of fit better that way. But yeah, I can definitely see Gary having made enough of a case at this point to warrant staying in the starting five.
Yeah, that's the
Who
thing.
are you taking out?
You know what? Follow-up questions are difficult when I'm the host, but I don't know. I still think that Nick will ultimately roll with the five guys that are core pieces going forward, which
Hmm.
means, yeah, you are going to play without a center. Yeah, you are going to play really unbalanced in terms of your starting five is just so much better than anybody you're bringing off the bench. Um,
Right.
but I think there's ways, for example, like, the issue with shooting guards, just like, as I mentioned about, like, you could still, let's say, bring OG out in the first round of substitutions, which is usually around the 6 minute mark of the first
Hmm.
quarter and the third quarter. You bring OG out and then you bring him back out with the bench. And so the OG can be sort of essentially the bench shooting guard when he is not in the starting five, when he's coming out at the start of the second quarter and the start of the fourth quarter. And I kind of need to see that because for me, like what the worst thing about these injuries is just that these bench groups that have consistently let the Raptors down, like that's been the main reason why the Raptors are below 500 this season is because of the fact that they have the least worst bench. Um, and
Yeah.
so if you have OG at least with that group, maybe you put Pascal with that group, all of a sudden, like, then you have two guys that can really play and sort of keep up the offense and also maintain the defense while Fred sits. Because ultimately, when Fred's been on the floor, the Raptors have been pretty good. When he sits, even for like 2 minutes, the Raptors bleed like 10 points. So what they need is like steady backup point guard play or at least steady backup guard play. And they haven't had that whatsoever this season. We've had good moments, I think, with Svi, a couple of really good moments with Delano, but very inconsistent. And the more that you can bring some of these healthy guys back and sort of artificially create that by putting some of your starters with the second unit, whether that is your suggestion with Gary going to the bench or my suggestion with you start with the five that you like the most, but then you sort of make some early subs and you swap it in and out. Um, as much as you limit the bench, it's going to be good. But I mean, for OG's sake, um, are you worried at all about his workload just because of the fact that he's picked up an injury in each of the past few seasons? Is there something that the Raptors maybe just have to look at in terms of maybe we don't play him 37 minutes a night and ask him to score 20 and also guard the team's best player every night?
I think I was more concerned with Pascal out of the lineup because I think at that point you were asking a lot out of him. Obviously, Scotty had the thumb issue for a little bit as well. So I think at that point you were probably asking quite a bit out of him. But I think now
Mhm.
I feel a bit more confidence, with Pascal there and, taking that load off. And I think he can handle it. I think, he's had issues in the past, but, I mean, the appendectomy, for example, that's just, that's just a random thing that happens. So I don't think that's a workload issue. I'll put it
No.
that way. So I think I would like to see him, be that guy that can get you 20 plus and, lock up the opposing team's best player. So I think he's got it in him. I'm excited for what's ahead for this team.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of being excited about what's ahead for this team, so I actually think that look, maybe within the course of the season, within the course of some of these games, have been undoubtedly frustrating, right? But
Hmm.
when you look at the bigger picture, the players that are going to be core pieces for this team, the players that are going to be here long term, a lot of them have shown growth this season, and I
Yep.
think more than anything else, that matters. Maybe more than specifically their record or what their standing is right now. Which, by the way, they're not like out of anything particularly. Like there's a whole jumble of teams unless you're like, Phoenix, um, Golden State, Utah, Brooklyn. A lot of teams like are just jumbled in the middle. Like they're really not, out of anything specifically, being 2 games out of 500 right now. But at the same time, the core pieces have done really well. So I really want to ask you this question: who has been the most improved Raptors player for you this season?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm just gonna have to go with Gary.
Yeah.
I think when you look at what he brought to the table towards the end of last season and what a lot of people, including myself, expected from him defensively,
Mm.
I think he has been the most improved player. Like on that side of the ball, like I don't think anyone would have dreamed that he would be, among the league leaders in deflections and wreaking that type of havoc as an on-ball defender. And I think now, especially with seeing Scotty Barnes come along defensively, Pascal Siakam's back up to speed on the defensive side of the ball. Now he gets to take those risks, and nothing's really hurting him. So. I really think that he is the most improved player. I will give a shout out to Fred though, because
Oh
he
yeah.
has been tasked with a ton and he has still delivered. Obviously, there's stuff to talk about with the late game offense, but by and large, on the whole, when you look at it, the improvements that Fred has made, especially in the mid-range and the playmaking, I think that's really significant. And so I have to shout him out too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I think Gary, to me, in terms of how I feel about the player, just putting aside the numbers and the stats and stuff like that, like that's the one I'm like, wow, he is impressing me every single night, and it's made me feel so much better about his long-term prospects as a Raptor. And I think the interesting thing is, so when you look at the actual numbers, it's not that different than what he did even last season as a member of the Raptors. When he started games last season, which was 10 games, or sorry, 12 games last year, he spent as a starter after coming over to the Raptors in a trade. He was averaging, 17 points. He was shooting roughly 40% from three, and it wasn't giving you too much in terms of rebounds or assists, a little bit with the steals. But, roughly speaking, his goal is to score, and that's his job is to score. And when he was in the starting five, he was scoring about 17 points a game, which is exactly what he's doing this season. On the season, he's averaging 17 points per game, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals. As you mentioned, he's still the league leader in deflections, by the way, per game. And he's shooting 38% from 3, 7.2 3-point attempts per game. So you might think about it like, okay, well, it doesn't look like he's actually improved that much. But really, when you break down the numbers, like last year when Gary came over, he had some ridiculous outbursts, right, in terms of what the scoring. He had, remember that career-high 44-point game he had against Cleveland, where he shot 17 of 19 from the field. All right, that was one of the highlights of the season, one of the few. He also set his career high against OKC with 31 points. That one the Raptors lost. He had the game winner against the Wizards, right, which was an incredible moment. And he had a 23-point game against the Knicks. I remember the Raptors lost that game because, unfortunately, Pascal double-dribbled on his way for a breakaway score that would have put the Raptors ahead in the final minute. But when you look at those kind of performances, it was each one of those were sort of paired with 8 points against Phoenix the first time he came to the Raptors, 6 points against Portland when he came to the return against his former team, 6 points against Chicago where he shot 2 of 14, 7 points against Atlanta where he shot, his last start of the season for the Raptors. Like, there just is a much more consistent level of play for what Gary has done this season. Like, really, all year, he's only scored under 10 points 4 times so far. One of those when he came off the bench in the first game, which was a little strange, by the way, in thinking back. Why did Gary come off the bench in the home opener while Goran started? That was a little weird to me. But, if he scratched that out, in the 25 games that he started, he's only scored less than 10 points 3 times. And all those are just like bad shooting performances that, sort of outliers, like 3 of 16 against Milwaukee. That game, he had 8 points. I mean, he was just coming back from injury that game.
Yeah.
At 2 of 8 against Washington, like a couple nights later. That was right after injury as well. So in between that, he has just been consistently giving you buckets. Like, he's had so many 20-point games for the Raptors this year. I mean, he's just he's become someone that you can fully rely on. So even if the numbers don't look ultimately that different in the average, I mean, he's just giving you consistent production from that starting lineup. Plus the fact that he's playing defense a lot better. Like, I think maybe some of it is still like he gambles a little bit, of course, but at the same time, you can't deny the fact that he's won a lot of those gambles. So I do agree with you, Gary. What about OG? I feel like he maybe is getting lost a little bit here. But to me, I think when I was watching OG in preseason, when I was seeing all the reviews preseason, I think the talk of like who was going to most improved for the Raptors in preseason, I think the consensus pick was going to be OG. Obviously, he's been sidelined with the injuries, but have you seen a different OG this season?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a different OG. I think the only reason he kind of drops out is because he's only played 15 games at this point. And so the injury is kind of taking him out of sight, out of mind. But in terms of his play, again, it's the one-on-one creation, the shot creation, and that's something the Raptors have really needed. That's why Gary has stood out too, right? There's been those lulls in the offense where it's like, okay, Gary, the team really needs you to do something here, and he's been able to come through. In a similar vein, I think OG had his initial struggles at the start of the season, but ever since then, once he figured it out, I mean, guess what? He was getting a new role that they were using him as the number one option with Pascal out. And then, you had Scotty emerge as well. So there was a bit of that feeling out process. And then since then, he just found a new level. His scoring's up by almost 5 points a game from last season, and so I think that's the big thing for me. The other thing too is if you're looking at specifically within the shot creation, what is he doing so much better? The ability to take pull-up threes is huge in the NBA now, and that was one thing I looked at and said, okay, you know, largely when you looked at OG Anunoby's career, his threes are assisted. His threes are, standstill. And so the fact that he's taking these pull-up threes off the dribble and making them consistently, and he's still, close to 37% as a shooter, close to his career mark, I think that is huge for this team going forward because, let's face it, this team is really lacking that aspect to their offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when, if you think long term of like, can somebody pop as like a star? Like and you think about all the star wings in the league, whether it's, LeBron, Luka, Kawhi, Paul George, like these type, Jimmy Butler, these types of players, like the threat of the pull up and the ability to play in the pick and roll game is like super essential. I don't think OG would be on that level because I think those guys have the playmaking to go along with the fact that they can make all sorts of difficult shots. But at the minimum, though, if you're going to be used in a primary function offensively as a wing, that has to be a skill in your bag with the pull-up jumpers. And we've seen OG, we got to see what he looks like since coming back, but I'm really excited to have him back in the lineup because he has added some of those tools to his game, as you mentioned. I mean, when you take out the first 2 games of the season where he shot 7 for 34 from the field, which was super weird. OG Anunoby this season is averaging 21 points per game, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.6 steals, shooting 46% from the field, 40% from 3 on 7.5 threes per game, which, as you mentioned, that's when you can, if you take the pull-ups, like that's how you're going to increase your volume. Like you're only going to get so many catch and shoots in the NBA. Like you really are. Like unless you're playing in like the Warrior system and you're Clay, you're just not going to get that many opportunities to catch and shoot, especially if you're a good shooter. So you're going to need to pull up, and he has done that. He has done that effectively. And when you talk about consistency, I mean, obviously he has been in the lineup, so people have kind of forgotten about this. These are his point totals. Again, when you scratch out the first 2 games, which I really don't understand what was going on there. 23 points, 22 points, 25 points, 16, 15, 36, 21, 23, 16, 14, 20, 17, 29. Like he's giving you a baseline production of at least 15 points, and often he is also going into the 20-point mark, and that's with other scorers in the lineup. That's in games where Gary gives you 20. That's in games where Fred obviously can give you 20, where Pascal is there too. So he has been really, really promising, and I think that that's also one of the biggest storylines in the season. It's just that when he comes back from the injury, I want to see OG return to that because it was super exciting. And honestly, we're running out of time, but I wanted to give Scotty Barnes a little bit of love in this sense because when you talk about most improved, obviously we didn't have a baseline of what Scotty was going to do in the NBA last year because he wasn't in the NBA. But when you talk about what he was doing in college last year at Florida State, when you're talking about what he did in Summer League for the Raptors, and you compare it to now, the fact that he is like, his numbers are better as a rookie than it was as a college player, which like, how many people can you really say that for? That's a really rare thing to have, so I think the offense improvements from Scotty has been so promising, and obviously we'll have to see how he improves from his rookie season. Obviously, there's a lot of expectations, but at the same time, if you just compare who he was in college to who he is now, it's night and day. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you took the theoretical view of what people expected of him before the season began, and then watched him during the season, based on that, he would be the most improved player because I probably had him as someone, maybe averaging like 10 and 6 coming off the bench, something like that.
And that was optimistic. And that would have been an optimistic projection just based on what it was coming into the season, right? All the talk from a lot of like very like respected draft analysts, and I don't think they were wrong. I just think that Scotty has changed so much. Is people are calling him a 0-level scorer. And then he's taking step back jumpers to tie the game against the Nets, and he's taking he's taking KD into the post. Like that's not 0 level. I'm sorry, that's just not.
It's nuts, man. He is basically, he's the one. He's Neo from the Matrix. Like you asked him to figure out the threes. He's basically, he's just uploading the disc, and he's like, okay, I can do this now. I can do this now. I can do this now. It's like, what else you got for me?
Damn, look at this guy pulling out the Matrix references, man.
I mean, DeRozan did it.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. I miss DeMar's analogies, man. He was so good with those analogies.
Yeah, he was great.
So, all right, Vivek, we appreciate you. We ran out of time to talk about your story on Justin Champagnie on Raptors.com, but you should definitely check that one out. By the way, quick prediction for Justin Champagnie. He is going to be this year's version of Yuta Watanabe in the sense that he's going to be really good in very, very small, tiny doses, and you're going to be really encouraged to see what he is. He's going to get a longer-term contract at the end of the season or maybe even midway through the season. And then next year we'll be, looking forward to Champagnie coming off the bench as not necessarily a defensive savior, but another guy who can give you a solid 3-3. What do you think of that?
I'm with it, man. I love his attitude. I love his effort. And those two things go a long way with Nick Nurse.
Yeah. Because, look, I was reading the last quote in your story. It's from Champagnie, and he said, quote, "I'm not the fastest guy. I'm not the most athletic guy, but I have the best mindset, in my opinion. I told myself, just go out there and do what coach says." That sounds word for word like what Yuta would say, man.
It is.
That's a Yuta quote if you just had to ask me who said that. So I've been pretty, encouraged for Champagnie, and I really wish, as I'm sure all Raptor fans do, that there was like 0.1 seconds left on the clock when he tipped it, because what a moment that would be for a rookie. So, Vivek, thank you for joining us on the show. We're going to take a break right here. I'm your host, Will Liu, and you've been listening to The Raptor Show, powered by DoorDash on Sportsnet 590, The Fan. Welcome back to the Raptor Show, powered by DoorDash on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. I'm your host, William Liu, and before we get to your Twitter questions, it is Friday, and I wanted to give some shout-outs from this week. So shout-out to Derek, Lance, JR, Josh, Andrew, Show, both Kyles, Maria, Dan, and Ryan. Also wanted to thank our guests this week, Blake Murphy, Eric Kareen, Amy Otterberts, Savannah Hamilton, and Vivek Jacob. And now, to your Twitter questions that you have kindly sent to me. The first one is from Sportsnet Ben Ennis, who you can catch in about, 2.5 hours. What are your general feelings on the team right now and sort of what to feel and where are we right now? And I think, when you look at the bigger picture, this is what I said to Vivek, like really, obviously within specific games and things like that, there are frustrations. I think when you look at, what they did against Brooklyn, what they did against Memphis, OKC, Detroit, Cleveland, Boston a couple of times this season, like there have been disappointing results this year. Don't get me wrong. Like even if you go back to the home opener, the Washington game, like the fact that they held Washington to like under 90 points and they lost is pretty wild, right? And I think when you look back on these results and you say, well, even if the Raptors won half of these, they'd be over 500. And then you probably be feeling a lot better. Like, let's say the Raptors beat the Nets the other night because, I don't know, Fred makes one of those two like really tough shots at the end of the game that he ended up taking, or Boucher's defensive coverage on the Mills three was tighter. We'd be thrilled. Honestly, we would have a very blessed week outside of all the COVID and everything like that. So there's like game-to-game frustrations. That's going to happen, honestly, every single season. Maybe less so in certain seasons when they don't frustrate you as much. But emotionally, you're never going to feel one way about the team for the whole year. That's just never going to happen. I think on the whole, though, in the bigger picture, the key players that are going to be here long-term, and this is what I was saying to Vivek, it's just, when you look at Fred, OG, Pascal, Scotty, Gary, I don't really know who to add to that list, really, quite honestly. You could say Delano's in that list. I'm not really sure just quite yet. I think he probably will be. I think Utah's probably going to be in that list. But, again, he's also another guy who's on an expiring contract. When you look at Malachi and Precious, like those guys have rookie deals, but they've been really up and down. But the core five guys that you're looking at, the main five guys that you've given long-term contracts to and the guys that you're really counting on, all five of those guys are performing to or above expectation this year. And for me, that's a great sign. Like, I think on the overall health of the team is still pretty strong, and the overall outlook of the team. So on that front, I actually feel pretty good about the year. It's just within games, though. I think they could come up with more results, and that's probably why you hear a lot of frustration either on the Raptors show between 2 and 3 or just in the Raptors Reaction podcast, which, I mean, look, I know some people are like, wow, some of these things are negative. It's called the Reaction podcast for a reason. It literally goes live, like, sometimes it goes live like 10 seconds after the game ends. So the Nets game, I'm steaming, or the OKC game, I'm steaming, and they're like 10 seconds, hey, you're going on air. It's it's a specific emotion. Do I feel that an hour afterwards, after the game is done? Probably not, but that's why it's called a reaction in the first place. So I think generally speaking, I feel good. So let's go to our next question. This is from It's Mike Christie. And they have asked, given Goran's absence, does this scream buyout? How can they get a meaningful trade without playing him? So yeah, I think it is screaming buyout. I don't think that unless a team really needs an expiring contract to make things work, which, you never know. Honestly, there's like a lot of like 3 or 4 team trades that the Raptors can get in on. Goran's contract is pretty large at $19 million. You can match a lot of money. You can sort of bounce a lot of money. Like, that's probably why he's still not fully bought out right now. But if that trade doesn't happen, and if the Raptors maybe don't have the appetite, for example, to take on some longer term deals, maybe in exchange for a pick, maybe in exchange for something to sort of grease the wheels, it probably will result in the buyout. Yeah, because I don't see him playing again for the Raptors. And yeah, in terms of like, can he have value without playing him? I mean, I think obviously if he had played, like, let's say he was fully committed to the season and he said, you know what, even though Um, this is not my goal, even though I have higher ambitions. I want to, play for the Dallas Mavericks or whatever. By the way, what's Dallas's record? Are they below the Raptors? I understand that circumstances are different, but let me just quickly check on that. But yeah, I mean, like, even with that, I'm not really sure how much more value would have accrued. Like, I think people understand what Goran Dragic can do. If you want to look at just like the one random game he popped in, which was the Detroit game when Fred was sat until that one game, he came in, he gave you like 17 points. He was decently efficient. Yeah, defensively, he wasn't the strongest. We all know that, but I think his value was mostly fixed. The thing is, like, the reason why it's difficult for a lot of contenders to trade for someone like Goran is the fact that he makes a lot of money, right? So, yeah, that's always going to be something that is going to affect his value when you go into a contender. Now, of course, if you're trying to balance the books, then of course the expiring salary actually becomes quite valuable. But we'll see. I wouldn't really hold my breath though, just to get that much from Goran. I just think overall, he was a throw-in to sort of make the salaries work, and could have been anybody. Could have been Iguodala. Could have been another guy on the team. Who knows? But didn't really matter. The point of making that trade was Kyle wanted to go to Miami all along, which by the way, he confirmed when that video that he dropped, and he was like talking to Eric Spoelstra at, let's say, 6:01 p.m. right after free agency, even though they were caught tampering, whatever, who cares? But, Kyle was saying, like, this is 3 years in the making. So he always wanted to go to Miami, and whether that was going to be last year at the trade deadline, which if you look at some of the Miami deals, they weren't that strong. Like, did you really want Kendrick Nunn and then the restricted rights to Duncan Robinson, who's like, in his mid-20s, or did you want to get a first rounder like Precious, who obviously has been really up and down? I think offensively you need to see more production from him, especially just on easy chances. But at the same time, yeah, if you gave me the choice there in terms of, do you want to pay Duncan this big salary to be playing the same position as Gary or et cetera, or do you want to get Precious and take a chance on a guy? I probably still go with the Precious route. And then Goran is just the price of doing business. So we'll see what happens to him. By the way, there's another Goran question. Most obscure random Raptor, Peja Stojakovic or Goran Dragic? So both players, very strange circumstances. Peja famously played, I believe, 2 games for the Raptors after arriving in a midseason trade. The connection there, obviously, both players from the Balkans. Peja is Serbian, Goran Slovenian. But the other interesting thing is, so Peja ends up getting, I forget, bought out or moved. I forget what happened in that trade. Also, I think David Anderson was involved, the Australian. But Peja ended up going to the Mavericks that year, which is probably where Goran's going to go. And of course, the Mavericks that year actually won the championship, and Peja actually had a couple of really nice performances. I think one game he had like 5 or 6 threes, maybe against the Lakers. It wasn't like a major piece, but definitely, got him a ring in that stretch. But yeah, that was really strange. Although, if you actually look at the Basketball Reference numbers, and this is obviously just a meme stat, it's not a real stat, but like he actually holds the Raptors record for like highest true shooting percentage in franchise history, because he only played 2 games, but he made a fair number of his jumpers. And I think his true shooting was like 70-something% for those 2 games. So that's technically the Raptors' all-time leader in true shooting percentage. Obviously, that's a meme stat. But the other thing with the Peja thing is, and this is why I would say Peja is, generally speaking, the more random all-time Raptor, is that there is an all-time moment involving Peja Stojakovic and Matt Devlin. And if you're a longtime Raptor fan, you know what I'm talking about. Really, if I did my work as a host, I would have asked my producers to go clip this clip, because it's so funny. So Peja hits a 3, and out of nowhere, Matt Devlin, who's on the call with Leo, screams out Punjabi, just out of nowhere. Now, the thing is, this was very, very strange. And even Leo in the moment was like, he's like, wow, I don't think Peja's ever had one of his 3s called Punjabi. Yeah, there you go. So let's hear it again. Hold on. Punjabi. It came out of nowhere. Brilliant work by the producers to have that ready, even though I didn't actually just tee it up. But yeah, like it just came out of nowhere. And I remember on the broadcast, he was like, "Oh man, it just kind of moved on." They kind of had a chuckle about it, but this is something that I remembered for a very long time, and I actually was at like before I was like doing this job and actually having Matt Devlin in studio beside me and talking to him about his career, and before Matt was shouting out the show on the broadcast, which still feels very surreal. I was at a fan event, and I was there with Matt Devlin in an informal setting. And I don't think you would mind me telling this story, but I walked up to him as a fan, and I was like, Matt, love your work. Thank you for calling these games. I think you're really wonderful what you do. You have to explain to me why you said Punjabi.
Punjabi.
You have to explain that to me. And he was like, look, it was Punjabi Heritage Night. And, he just wanted to shout out. There was like maybe like a Punjabi broadcast that night. So I was like, okay, I guess I kind of understand. But maybe he was just trying to make like a page of Punjabi, kind of like really stretch a pun. Didn't really work out. But yeah, I would still go with Peja as the most random Raptor on that fact alone. So maybe next time, honestly, with Matt Devlin in the studio, maybe I'll ask him again, just on record, because I can't believe I forgot to ask him the 2 times we had him on the show so far. So let's go to our next question. We have Ari asking, how do you think the league can show better leadership / accountability around their COVID situation? Look, I think for me, I do sympathize with the league because it feels like even on the governmental level, they were very unprepared for COVID to return in the fashion that it did. I think, again, I'm definitely not a medical expert. If I was, I wouldn't do this show ever. But when you have a situation where, yes, the general population is largely vaccinated, when you look at the States, when you look at Canada, so you're not as worried about the virus sort of continuing to like circulate here. The thing is, it's a global pandemic, right? So there are other parts of the world that are going to be, have less access to vaccines. And I think, honestly, there's a very real discussion to be had about the fact that a lot of Western nations and just in general, more powerful nations have not been as willing to like share vaccines around the world. When you look at the vaccine companies, they haven't really been able to been very open with giving away patents and things like that, which really, I mean, what are you really doing with things like patents in our time in our global pandemic? The thing is, you need to like get COVID under control around the world first, because as soon as you don't, there will be eventually, everyone knows with viruses, they mutate, right? So they'll come back and they'll have more situations. So I feel like, there should be situations that you have to plan for these things. You actually have to make up backup plans. Yes, the NBA season was going mostly swimmingly for the first 2 months of the year. And, we're enjoying games, when we're back at Scotiabank Arena and there's full capacity and the crowd is good and, everything is good. But you have to have backups in place, right? And I think that's where the NBA plans, it just doesn't feel fully right. I mean, honestly, when you look at sort of the attitudes that the players sort of started taking, or even some of the coaches started taking, like there was less mask wearing, there was more players going out and about. The league's COVID policies were very lax in the sense that if you were, vaccinated, you can just pretty much go do whatever you want. The texting policies, all that stuff was a lot more lax. And maybe the players wouldn't have accepted it. Obviously, this is something that is a situation where, yes, it is a matter of, it's a matter of public health, but also at some level, it is a level of personal choice as well. But at the same time, like the NBA really, really kind of just like almost forgot about COVID in a way, and now it's coming back really, really hard on them, right? So, what can you really do? I think as a society, obviously, that's where you look at your governments more for some of these responses rather than necessarily the NBA. As much as the NBA is very powerful and they have a lot of resources at their disposal, like they've made sure at least most of the players are vaccinated, fully vaccinated. Most players are getting booster shots. But at the same time, like, some of the virus has mutated and it seems to be cutting through some of that stuff. And, at least right now, we're not seeing as many instances of players having severe symptoms, which is great. But at the same time, I don't think the NBA was prepared essentially for for COVID to come back in this way. And you even look at, just what's going on with the Raptors tickets, right? I'm sure a lot of people are really upset. Like, they buy tickets coming into the season. Tickets obviously very expensive for a lot of people. And you have the Warriors coming in, Steph Curry. That's like the greatest show in basketball right now. Definitely people want to go to that game. And then, last second it gets announced it's 50% capacity. And now there's like a lottery system. And I'm sure for a lot of people who are holding tickets, who are season ticket holders, who are people who just bought random tickets to come to the game, It's got to be a super frustrating situation. So I feel for everybody involved, but that's where you really have to have backup scenarios where if this happens, we know exactly what's going to be in play. And that I haven't really felt the confidence from, honestly, the NBA level or even just from a governmental level, quite honestly. But this is a bigger conversation, and I'm really not that equipped to have it. So let's move on to the next question. Kiana asks, what is the purpose of the coach on the Raptors bench holding up cardboard-looking signs? I need to know, are they plays? Yes, absolutely they are plays. This is something that I would love to talk to the coaches about. I don't think the coaches really want to go out and just be like, hey, this is what we're doing. Like, I don't think that, yeah, especially when you look at the Raptors, for example, other teams, generally speaking, there's more access to the assistant coaches and things like that. For the Raptors, it's only Nick that speaks, essentially. Obviously, you had the little halftime interviews and stuff like that, where you talk to the coach and they're like, hey, what are your adjustments coming out of halftime? And they're like, let's play defense. And we're like, okay, cool, let's go back to the game. Like, there's that, but there's not the general access that you would usually have to assistant coaches. And really, when you look at it, it's usually the same guy who has signs up. And if you haven't seen it during the broadcast, occasionally you'll catch flashes of it, but somebody on the bench will hold up 3 giant cards, and they'll have 3 random images on it. Now, of course, no one has seen enough of these to really crack the code just yet, at least I hope, although there are, scouts in NBA, every NBA arena. But I think the goal is just to have a better chance of communicating to the players of what you're about to do, right? When you look at NBA signals, it's not the hardest thing to crack because sometimes, for example, I saw in the other game, the camera will pan over to Nick, and he's just holding a triangle with his fingers. And, like, what do you think he's going to run, man? That's probably a triangle and 2, okay? So, like, there's not, like, a huge, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not a huge secrecy thing, but I think it actually really helps with communication because it does seem a little arcane to me that for NBA coaches, they're just yelling into the crowd, right? My producer's holding a box and 1 with his fingers. Yeah, I'm sure Nick has done that too. It does seem a little arcane to me that they're just yelling onto the floor for the 5 players on his team to hear it over the roar of the entire arena. I'm sure a lot of the times it doesn't really communicate and get through, especially when we're talking about really important moments. So when you see these cards go up, it's a lot easier to look over to the bench and then break down, okay, what play we're going to running. And I think it's actually really innovative. I think obviously in baseball there's such an elaborate series of signs. I think in football, there's people who are in people's earpieces and there's ways to communicate that way. And I think this is just an easier way to communicate. You hold up these signs and you can tell what play you're about to run, offensively or defensively. And it's pretty smart by Nick. So let's go to the next question. We have Alex, who for some reason is just not here. If you had to do a dim sum draft, what are your top 3 picks? Chicken feet number 1 for me, obviously. I think number 2, man, is there somebody to choose from? Obviously, get all your dim sum on DoorDash. Wow, this is really tough. Okay, I'm probably going to go with Shumai number 2, which is another classic. And then number 3, I've only really had it at Roll Sam, but it's like this really nice like egg tart kind of dish where I guess it's not a tart. It's really actually just like a pastry, and then you bite into it, and then there's like custard filling inside. That thing is really, really good.
So good and tasty.
All right. Thank you, producer Derek. Let's go to the next question. Alex, come back, man. Come on. We need you. All right. Next one from my guy, Arun. Yeah, he's actually in the lab right now making more of these because that's what the Raptor show is going to be. If they cancel more games, it's just Alex rapping for
Another one.
50 minutes. No, it's going to be another like hour of that. So Arun asks, since Steph Curry and the Warriors are the greatest show in sports at the moment, they're getting raucous support from away crowds. What's the sensation going to be like covering the spectacle in a half-full arena, and what would you like for your birthday? Arun, I already told you, man. I really try not to make a big deal of my birthday whatsoever. This year, the NBA is actually, or the Raptors aren't playing on my birthday for once, which has been really nice. So I can at least try to take the day. But honestly, for me, like I just really try to like give back a little bit on my birthday. So honestly, send me some charities or some charitable initiatives that have really caught your eye, Arun, and let me know. But that's generally what I try to do on my birthdays. I'm not even kidding, by the way. This is not like me trying to like sound like a better person or whatever. Like this is really what I do on my birthday. Donate some blood and donate some money, and usually that's about it. But yeah, in terms of the Warriors thing, I mean, it's gonna be cool, man. I just think that like for me, even just I'll go before the game to watch anybody warm up and shoot, right? Like I'll literally come before the game and I'll watch Isaac Bonga warm up and give you the report on that. I'm definitely gonna go and watch the Steph Curry warm ups, and I'm sure a lot of people will too. Like that's actually a real thing that people have done all around the NBA. Is just like they just know you go before a game and you see these shooting routines from Steph. And yeah, I mean, the other angle is just like, it's just really cool, man. The fact that obviously Del Curry played with the Raptors, Steph was, in his teenage years at the time, Vince Carter was telling us on the broadcast the other day about like, he was going one-on-one, against Steph, and Steph was a teenager, and Vince would block a shot every single time and not let him score. But like the fact that like Steph actually spent a fair amount of time in Scotiabank Arena, or at the time Air Canada Center, whether that's on the actual floor itself or even in the practice facilities, that's just kind of cool seeing him come back and come through and do that. So I'm sure, look, there will be a fair contingent of Warriors fans in there. I obviously know that the Raptors fans themselves, this is a very strong fan base. So it's not going to be like the Brooklyn Nets situation where you'll have like a huge crowd yelling MVP at Steph. To be honest, I'm not even sure if Steph will play. I think he's out, right? So maybe all this is moot. But at the same time, like, yeah, whatever Steph comes around, if he's healthy, I'm going to try to soak it in. Because look, as much as you're a professional and you do what you do, you still want to just like take it in, because some of these moments are historical. When you're going to the NBA Finals and you're seeing all this stuff happen, like of course, yes, you have to be very, very professional and very objective. But at the same time, any media person who doesn't feel like a fan in those moments, I think is almost losing out on something, because those are moments that I think anybody would want to have, right? So I think that does it for questions today. Producer Derek, do you have a super quick question? Obviously we have 30 seconds, so we got to bring out the basement at least once.
Who is your favorite Raptor on, the bad teams? Like mine was Mike James, because that team was just really fun to watch. I also think Mike James was ahead of his time, because stop pop and three was like his thing, and
yeah, that's true.
That's totally the game now. But I really enjoyed that team. We had some really lean years, so just having a fun team was something really exciting for me.
That's a great one. Mike James, shout out Mike James. He was hunting for a contract with the Raptors. I don't think I've seen a player play so well in April other than Mike James. He turned into Steph Curry and then got a long-term deal, so happy for him. I think you're right, actually. He was a little bit ahead of his time. He would have been a really good like Jordan Clarkson-type scorer in the modern NBA. I think for me, just as in that same period, Jamario Moon was just someone that I really, really loved. In fact, I actually have like a T-shirt that I made at a summer camp once, where there was like activity of like just paint this T-shirt, some random summer camp activity, and I believe I made a Jamario Moon jersey, which is pretty hilarious. And I don't know.
Jerseys are pretty cheap, so
no, there's nothing cheaper than this. This is probably like one of those 99-cent Chinatown T-shirts, and I just wrote Moon on the back, 33, and yeah, that was a great time. So thanks. That does it for us today and for the week. I'm your host, Will Lou, and you've been listening to The Raptor Show, powered by DoorDash on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Make sure you find The Raptor Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, and please rate and review our show. As a reminder, we are now streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel Monday to Friday between 2 and 3 p.m., and you can also catch the archived episodes there. Thanks again to Vivek Jacob for joining our show, to producers JR and Derek for their help as well, and we will talk to you next week.